Western science and philosophy have always had a problem. And that is, they were based on the theory that there is a physical, material, external world. But they have recognized that it is only a theory, and it can never be proven. But they don't let you know that in school. They teach you it as a presupposition, as if it were a fact. But they know it is only a theory. And most of the great Western philosophers, Spinoza, Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Schelling, etc., have all recognized the impossibility of proving that there is an external world. Kant is famous for saying we can never know the thing in itself, the Ding an sich, right? Very famous. You cannot. All you can know is your own consciousness. And your consciousness imagines that there are things out there, but it can never know them. It can only know its interpretation of the modifications of its own consciousness. And modern neuroscience accepts the same thing, except they will say it's not your mind, but it's your brain that is interpreting an external world. But that is an even secondary level of theory, because there is no direct experience of a brain. None of us experience our brains. We're just taught that this is all occurring in our brain, and we tend to believe it. But there is no proof that the brain has anything to do with consciousness, and you never have any direct experience of that. This is important to recognize, that this is an unsolved philosophical scientific problem, and that the only thing we ever have direct experience of or contact with is our own consciousness. Now, the neuroscientists will say that the physical organism takes in information through the five senses, and through the nerves, like the optic nerve, etc., it will go into different parts of the brain, and they have no idea where, because the neuroscience is in its infancy, and it hasn't really got a sense of even how the brain functions. Their notions are the equivalent of seeing where a computer gets warm and then assuming that that's the part of the computer that's processing certain information. It's that rudimentary. And so with MRIs and that, they can see which areas, general areas of the brain are being activated, but they have no clue of what's really going on, or whether any of what's going on in there has anything to do with consciousness. You can modify it, but it certainly may very well not be generated at all through the brain or by the brain. So let's recognize that all of us have been indoctrinated with the theory that there is an external world that we are living in. And we were taught it not as a theory, but as if it were a fact, and we accepted it. But in fact, the only fact that we know is consciousness itself. And we do not know where consciousness takes place, or even if that is a question that has any meaning, because whereness depends on the reality of an external world. Where does a dream take place? You might dream that you're in California, but does the dream take place in California? No. Does the dream even take place in your brain? No, there's no way to know that. It occurs in a non-localizable consciousness. And so in that sense, each of us as an individual ego is living in our own world, literally, And our worlds, at the ego level, we know, are based on fantasies, traumas, wrong presuppositions that we were taught in school, unconscious sanskaras that we haven't even a clue about. A world is created through a number of mental operations and premises that are completely unprovable, and most of which we do not even know that are part of the operating system of ego consciousness. And until we begin to do something like a psychoanalysis or an atmanological process, we don't even bring to the surface what the basic principles of that operating system are, so that we can see the absurdity of most of the things we believe about ourselves and about reality, and then can begin to make changes in them to lead a more healthy, happy, peaceful life. But none of these things that we tend to believe, including that we exist as separate individuals, has any proof or any basis in fact whatsoever. And the further back we go in terms of the history of philosophy, I think we will find wiser and wiser philosophers. And the further back you go, all the way into ancient Greece, the more that the theory of a material world existing was considered more improbable. It's less likely that there even is a material world. And more likely that all there is a world of consciousness that is then concretized at a lower level into the illusion of a physical world. And the whole idea of Plato, and from Socrates, he got it, the idea of going back to higher levels of consciousness in which we reach the archetypes from which the forms of the material world are derived, and we get to the actual cause of what seems to be existing on the physical plane, and to the root of consciousness. And the higher we go, to the very source of the archetypes which emerge out of the mind of the supreme intelligence, the more we are one with God, the more we are one with goodness. Because what we think of as a world is a product of the goodness of the source, of God, projecting a beautiful dream of harmony and infinite beauty. But then, once that beautiful dream is created and beings are dreamed up with free will, they can begin to use that free will to make the dream into something more ugly and turn the beautiful dream of a Garden of Eden into a nightmare hell realm of savage capitalism, as we have managed to do in a few thousand years. So the dream, once it is created, of an illusion of a world, will then begin to go by itself. And by those who are more caught in the illusion, they will lose the goodness that comes from recognizing the source that is pure consciousness and knows itself as pure consciousness. To those whose consciousness is convinced of their materiality, who then become egocentric, narcissistic, greedy, lustful, angry, etc., all the things that we have studied and know firsthand about how egos operate. So the ego is simply the delusion of an external world and the consequences of that delusion. So the way out of the delusion is to have the courage to stop believing that there is an external world. At least be open-minded enough to recognize that it is only a theory that one has been living under as if it were a fact. And the shift that will occur just from being willing to being open-minded enough to recognize that you've been trapped in this belief and that it has determined your actions and your fears. Because when you recognize there is no external world and this is your own dream, there is no more fear. But if you're in an external world and you are a material being who is perishable with a very short shelf life, you're going to try to get all you can to not be left out of any of the pleasures that are available in this short time that I've got. And all of that creates hunger, creates consumerism, creates greed of all kinds. And the willingness to act unethically, to trespass against others in order to get as much as you can for your little illusory self. This is the whole problem of the modern world. But once we can subtract from the illusion of this modern world that it actually exists, we can recognize that it is a dream that is malleable. It can change. The stuff that dreams are made on can be redreamed without having to fight our way to create a better world. We can redream that world. It's much easier to do it that way. If you try to politically force a change in a world that doesn't even exist, you're just going to end up with a lot of blood on the streets and throughout the whole world, and that's what's happening now. And people enjoy that blood in the same way that a dog will enjoy chewing a bone to the point that where its gums bleed, and it will enjoy the taste of its own blood. And we enjoy that. And once the ego has a taste for blood, then that's what it tends to go for. And goodness is no longer interesting to it. Goodness becomes boring. Love becomes boring. It's all bland. People like movies that are filled with violence and explosions and rapes and murders of all kinds, and they become more and more bizarre and extreme. And the movie is just reflecting the consciousness out there of the world that doesn't really exist out there, but is the collective illusion, and showing us our own minds, our own loss of the goodness of our own hearts, that then produces at large this materialist nightmare of imperialism. So, if we are going to stop the rape, not only of human beings, but of nature, then we have to recognize that what we are doing is happening within a delusional context. And to do that, we have to have the courage to explore the possibility that we are not living in a physical world at all. Nor are we living in a world produced by the brain, but that it is pure mind. The brain is just another concept within consciousness. So if all there is consciousness, then you can only be the source of that consciousness. You cannot be an appearance in that consciousness, because who does it appear to? You are the ultimate subjectivity to whom the world appears. And all the world is a modification of consciousness, and that consciousness is only a projection. Where can it be a projection from except from the very subjectivity that is now experiencing it?